Hello, I'm Brett Etheridge, founder of Dominate the GMAT. Dominate the GMAT is a leading provider of on-demand video-based test preparation for the GMAT to help students get into business school. What you're about to see is a segment from a full lesson from one of our courses. If you like what you see, check out www.dominatethegmat.com for not only this full lesson, but other course offerings as well. For now, enjoy your free session.
Remember I said, when you're analyzing an argument, leave your opinions at the door. The number one thing I see that students do wrong with this essay is weigh in on whether or not they agree with the argument. I don't care whether you agree with the argument or not. Your opinions don't matter here. What does matter is how well you can actually pick this thing apart, break it down into its component parts, right? And so let's look at the directions. The directions say, discuss how well reasoned you find the argument. That's the bottom line of what we're trying to do. Let's play a summary real quick. Remember back to critical reasoning. What are the parts of an argument? The conclusion, the evidence, which we call the premises, and then the unstated premises, which are the assumptions. And really, most of picking apart arguments rests in our ability to identify and then either attack or support those assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. And we said we can make our lives a lot easier if we can identify a pattern of argument, because then we inherently know kind of what the premise is, what the conclusion is, what those assumptions are. And what are the three major patterns of arguments that we looked at in critical reasoning?
Analogous, generalization, and causal.
Yeah. People can make arguments by analogy, arguments by generalization, and then causal arguments that may be overlooking those confounding factors. And so essentially what we're trying to do is exactly what we do in critical reasoning. Identify the parts of the argument, break them out and say, hey, I see a bad analogy here. I see a bad generalization here. There's a poor causal argument. Here's what the author is assuming, and here's why it may not be a good idea of assuming that. And when we look at the directions again, that's exactly what it's saying, right? In your discussion, be sure to analyze the line of reasoning and the use of evidence in the argument. What does that mean? That means exactly what we just talked about. What are the parts of the argument? How well do they fit together? How much does the evidence support the argument? For example, you may need to consider what questionable assumptions underlie the thinking. That's exactly what we've been trained to do. And what alternative explanations or counterexamples, especially with causal arguments, those confounding factors, might weaken the conclusion. Stop, period, end of story. You can get a 6 if you just do that. Next part of the directions, you can also discuss. That means if you want, if you have time. Not necessary, but nevertheless, you can then say, oh, and by the way, here is what information or what evidence, if you would provide it, would strengthen your argument, Mr. Author. Again, fill in the holes. Step 1, pick it apart. Step 2, if you want, you can also then help the author out a little bit. Does it make sense of what we're trying to do? So what I think we should do, and I think it'll be valuable, let's actually read that and then take a little bit of time and do some brainstorming on your own. And then we'll come back and kind of discuss what you would talk about in your essay around this argument. Go ahead and read it. So let's start talking through this. And let's start real clear. What's the author's conclusion? What's the whole point of this thing?
That what happens with this company reflects what happens with the state.
Okay, so the conclusion is that what happens with this company is going to then extend to what happens with the state. I would say that's absolutely something we're going to talk about, but be very clear. What's the conclusion? Like that's kind of almost a mini argument.
Right.
Is it widespread business failure and reduced quality of life will spread because workers are old?
Because, hold on, stop there. Once you use the word because, the because part is everything that's supporting that. Does that make sense? Those are all the premises. But clearly, all of this is building up to, and exactly what you said, Nick. You said it just looks like kind of a list of statements and facts. That's really what arguments are. Point number 1, sentence 1. Point number 2, sentence 2. Point number 3, sentence 3, et cetera, et cetera. And then what does it do? It says since. Remember, since is one of those introductory clue-in words that's going to be a premise. Since, blah, 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 blah. And then comma, there will be widespread business failure and reduced quality of life in our state. Isn't that the whole point? Build up, build up, build up, build up, boom, the world's coming to an end. Well, specifically, there's going to be widespread business failure and a reduced quality of life in our state. That's the conclusion. That's what you wrote down as your conclusion?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Based on what? Well, everything else, right? All of that other stuff now supports it. But what we want to do now, what things did you note on your scratch paper that you're going to talk about in your essay? What are the assumptions? What are the weak assumptions? Nick, you already said you don't view this as a very good argument. Why not? Let's start poking holes in it. What are we going to talk about?
Well, it's not, well, first off, I mean, the first thing I wrote down was, why are the grads looking in other states? Is the pay not good? Does the weather suck? Is it, what are the reasons why the workforce is weakening, why they're worried about replacing it? I mean, there's got to be a reason why these grads are looking to go elsewhere. There's something that's not keeping them in the state. So why is that though? I mean, maybe that needs to be improved, you know, like I said, maybe that has to do with pay. Maybe they're not paying them enough, so they said, fine, so I'll go to a different state to make more money.
Let me ask you this question. Does the why matter? What do you think about what he just said?
I think it's good. I looked at it as an assumption, like looking at it a little bit farther down, saying like they're saying that only college kids are driving down this area. Only college kids. So what about the other population? So people that don't go to college, are they staying there or leaving too? I mean, there's a large portion of that population that they don't even talk about.
Yeah. Or what's happening over there? Are they staying? Are they going?
Yeah. So
They don't seem to talk. I guess what both Mike and I are trying to say is they don't talk about the big picture very well. They don't really say the whoever's the politician does not really state the whole state's frame of mind. They're just talking about, well, the college kids.
specific data. Like there's no specific data to back it up.
Right.
I mean, they say only college kids and all of them. So does that mean every kid that goes to college is not going to go back?
And every state does not just have college kids in it.
Here's one of the things to be careful of. What are you thinking about this?
Well, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, and it seemed like they were making also an assumption that college kids aren't interesting in their biggest part of their company, which was the textiles and paper. So.
See, here we're getting into more of it. And what you guys say isn't wrong, but here's what's important to understand. We're trying to dissect an argument. And the why of it isn't nearly as important as the connection of it to the conclusion. And here's the deal. They're telling us flat out that an increasing percentage of graduates, our college graduates, are leaving and finding jobs in other states. Fact. We take that as gospel truth. I don't care why. Maybe it's because our lakes and rivers are drying up and nobody wants to stick around for XYZ reason. Here's the deal. I don't care why. What I care is that it is happening. Fact. Premise. What we want to do, though, is why is that relevant, or how does that connect at all to this conclusion? That's what he says is happening, fine, but because of that, all of a sudden we're going to have widespread business failure and reduced quality of life? He's assuming something, right? So what? They're leaving. I don't care why. Maybe it's because, you know, the Rockies are terrible. You know, or the Broncos suck and nobody wants to stick around and watch them. I don't care why, but I'm assuming something. I'm assuming that if that's A and he's drawing from A, B, what is he assuming?
That only college kids are going to be the ones to fill the positions.
Exactly. He's assuming that, so what if they leave? If they're not the ones who are going to be filling these positions, it's irrelevant. So he's assuming that, first of all. What else is he assuming? How do we know kids from other states aren't coming here? Our college kids might be going elsewhere, but maybe all the kids from Massachusetts or Maine or whatever are coming here. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And I was looking at the industries one too. He said the revenue sales are down for that company. So we're supposed to assume that all the other companies in that area are going downhill as well.
Yeah, so this is a separate deal. So this is, we're gonna have multiple paragraphs. But paragraph 1 might be, or paragraph 2 or paragraph 3, whichever one you talk about is, he's basing his conclusion on this premise that our college kids are going elsewhere. Why is that bad? Well, he's assuming A, that those kids would be the ones taking those jobs anyway, which maybe they would or not. Maybe those jobs require more skill than they would have. And B, that they're not being replaced by kids from other states coming in, right? And possibly some other things. This is what we want to be doing with these essays. That would be a paragraph. Does that make sense?
Hello again. Hopefully you found the information in that segment helpful. If you did, just imagine how much you would learn in the full lesson, or better yet, the full course. If you like what you saw, check out www.dominathegmat.com for our full course offerings. So thanks for watching, and go out and dominate the GMAT.